All right, somebody had seen my video on how I store my sunshades and some other things, and noticed that I use Aperture rings and was curious about them. So I thought I would do a quick segment on it and show people kind of why we do it, what the effects are, and a couple ways to accomplish it. So what we're talking about is visibly improving your sight of the target in a heavy mirage situation. So if you've ever shot in a very hot, sunny day where you are kind of shooting at the blob, as we call it, so that black center is sort of bouncing around, or sometimes it's doing a vertical shift up and down, and you've got just a ton of mirage blowing around in there, and it really doesn't give you a clear sight picture, and it's very easy because of how that center is bouncing to throw a high or low shot if you don't know what you're doing and if you're not doing it right. I've done all of those things. I've gotten really lucky shooting at the blob. I've also gotten burned at it. And that is typically because I, like a lot of people, will shoot through the mirage, as we call it, which means we're going to maintain the highest power possible, even if it's at the distortion of the target, because some people believe that they would rather shoot at a larger target that's moving a little bit than a smaller target that isn't moving. It's really debatable. I've been burned using both methods. I've had success both methods. I do find myself sort of using a hybrid effect now. I will back off the scope power a little bit and use some sort of aperture reduction to help give me an advantage against the mirage. You really have to find what works for you. There are some guys who are incredibly good at shooting through mirage. There are some really good shooters that will back off to, as much as 10 or 15 power to shoot through mirage. It really comes down to what you practice, what you're comfortable with, and how you shoot. So, but let's just talk about aperture reduction and what it does. So what we're talking about is taking the objective here and reducing the limit of light through it. Now, this is an old photography trick, and I shouldn't really say it's a trick, but we're sort of making it a trick out of a known photography principle, which is aperture reduction. Reducing or enlarging your aperture will, in fact, change your depth of field. And what we're talking about is the distance that an image remains in focus. Now, the wider the objective, the shorter the depth of field is going to be, meaning we have a much narrower margin to try to maintain any kind of focus. And that's why when you're at a very high power with a large objective, or any normal objective, I should say, at a target that is in mirage, you are going to see, kind of the bounce effect, or, some kind of, wiggle with that center black mass moving around. You're going to lose your definition of your X ring, 10 ring, 9 ring, all of your different rings. It becomes very difficult to shoot. So what do we want to do? Well, one of the effects is to reduce your aperture size. Now, Dan Polabel sells these on his website. These are a very nicely made threaded aperture reduction. I want to say they're, I don't know, 20 or 30 bucks. I can't remember. I bought them a while ago. They are made for a variety of scopes. He's got them on his website. But let's say maybe you have an objective where he doesn't make one of these for you. Or maybe you don't like the idea of threading something in or out, or you want to have some other options. So this is an old bench rest trick. In fact, I found it out of I don't even remember, some kind of really old bench rest publication from like 20 or 30 years ago. But it's very effective, and it essentially does the same trick as well. So this is, if you're familiar with pipe insulation, it's that black pipe insulation that goes around and keeps your pipes from freezing. Runs a couple bucks to buy a 2 or 3 foot section of it. And what I did is I measured the diameter of my objective sunshade here that I needed, cut a piece of the pipe accordingly, and it pops right in. Now, this one's a little sloppy. It should be just a hair tighter, but it essentially, if you look, it does the same thing as the aperture ring. Now, it's not as clean, and I have actually used these in conjunction with each other. So I have shot, and what I typically will do is leave all of this inside of my carry thing, and depending on the conditions, I'll either pull out the foam and only use the aperture ring. Sometimes if I think I'm going to be using the need for the aperture, maybe it's kind of a sunny and cloudy day, you've got some spottiness. Removing this on and off isn't always effective. So sometimes if you're going to be moving it around a lot, I like having the foam. I can just go in, pull it out, sun comes back out, I can slap it back in. And the reason we want to do that is because if you have any kind of an aperture reduction and you start getting an overcast day, I mean, you are severely limiting the amount of light that can transmit through here. It will affect your picture negatively to some degree if it is dark out, you know, whether it's early morning or overcast or whatever it is. So, you know, these are a couple different ways that you can do it. But, you know, the rings are pretty sexy. I really like them, but I also like having the backup for a foam. I've also let countless people borrow these at matches. So sometimes it's nice to be like, well, I can let you borrow the foam, or I can let you borrow a ring, whatever it is that you want to borrow and try out. So when you do this, whether it's with the foam or with the ring, what you're doing is you are limiting the amount of visible light that can transmit in. So imagine that you have your normal, let me take this foam out here. You have your normal objective, right? And you've got this much opening for the light to come in. So the light can come in from a very wide angle. So downrange, it's creating a very narrow focus window. So it sort of amplifies that mirage effect. What we want to do is we want to enlarge that depth of field as much as possible. And the way you do that in the photography world, it's called stopping down. But in our world, it's simply making the hole smaller at the end. Now, you can also accomplish this with just buying a scope cap and cutting a hole in it with scissors or a razor blade. It doesn't matter what you're doing, but what you're doing is you are taking what would be visible light coming in like that, and you are making the light a little bit more parallel with each other as it comes in, because only the parallel light, or mostly parallel light, is coming in through this hole now instead of, you know, this angular light. And so what that does is by sort of paralleling that light, it makes the distance or the depth of field that everything is in focus much longer, and it deaccentuates the visible mirage. All of this being said, these are highly subjective. I know guys who have tried these in just about every condition, and they don't like them. They don't work. They don't think it changes anything. I know guys who will only shoot with these when it is really bright out. You know, as soon as the sun comes out and there's any mirage, boom, they throw one of these on. I am sort of a wait and see kind of guy. I am going to start the day without them. I always keep them near me, either in my gun bag that's right next to me, or it sort of depends on where I'm shooting and how I'm shooting, but I will always keep some form of aperture reduction easily accessible to me when I am at a match, because I never know when I'm going to need it. I've had days where it's been overcast, and then, you know, you get an hour of just blazing sun. Sometimes this can make a difference. I realize this is a little rambling, and I know it doesn't necessarily make sense because I can't easily show you the effect, you know, on camera. But it's something that I would say, if you have had problems in the past with any sort of light transmission, whether it's mirage issues or, you know, maybe you put on a sunshade and you're still having some problems, try some kind of aperture reduction. Again, whether it's foam, whether it's an actual made for your scope reducer ring, or if you just grab a piece of foam or a cap, or, you know, whatever you want to do, reducing the amount of visible light is what will achieve that reduced mirage effect. And it might just be enough to get you into the black and be able to see some rings, be able to get some kind of hold off that matters to you, and have some sort of repeatability during a tough condition when others don't.